It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote tonight, Dr. Joan Maloof from Salisbury University in Maryland, Professor Emeritus of Biology, founder of the Old Growth Forest Network, author of many inspirational books, and we're very pleased that she has joined us this evening and this weekend. Without further ado, may I present Dr. Joan Maloof.
Well, it's good to have a minute of levity, right? Because this year has been, right? Oh my God, just one bad news after another, it feels like. And it's such an extreme because, do you remember Earth Day 2022? And Biden put out an executive order and said we're going to protect the mature and old growth forests and the federal lands. And I couldn't believe that I heard the words old growth coming out of the president's mouth. Like, I just never could imagine that. As much as I have liked some past presidents, I never heard him talk about old growth forests. And for a slight minute, you kind of think, maybe I had something to do with this, right? All of us talking about these forests, we kind of made a change in society. It reached the top of the government. Wow, this is it. And it's going to happen in our lifetimes. It was so exciting. And Biden said to his agencies, okay, you have 1 year to define old growth, to tell where it is and how much of it is left. I was like, wow, that is a big job. And I really doubted if they could do that in 1 year. You know, we think of the federal government and how it works. And but to their credit, all these agencies got to work right away. And in fact, we even got a phone call at Old Growth Forest Network, and they were asking for our data layer of where all the old growth forests were. And I'm like, we don't have any such data layer. Like, we've been depending on you, and you're not giving us this data, so you're going to have to look elsewhere. And not only did the government employees, federal employees worked very hard. In fact, they even worked with NASA, and they got satellite data from the JEDI instrument on the International Space Station just to measure above ground biomass and above ground carbon, but also independent researchers that we know, they got to work too doing this independently because they didn't want to necessarily trust the numbers from the government. But amazingly enough, within that 1 year, on April 2023, Earth Day, they made the announcement of their definitions of old growth forest, which weren't too bad, I didn't think. And they said how much was left. And their number was, on the federal land, 18% of the forests were old growth, which seemed kind of high, but 14% of that was pinyon pine juniper. And the reason these are old is because they're not very commercially valuable, so they're still there, right? So that left 4% of old growth forests on the federal land, but that was still pretty good. It's more than I think is left on the privately owned lands. And of that percentage that they identified as old growth, about 50% of that was already protected in wilderness areas and such, and roadless areas, and that meant 50% of that was not protected at all. So then came the next part of the executive order rollout, and it was, okay, now we can define it, we know how much there is, let's define threats to the old growth forest, because this whole thing was to try to protect the old growth forest. So when they came out with the threats to the old growth forest, it was insects, diseases, fire, extreme weather. What did they miss? Yes, incredible, right? So And so we all activists, we got to work, right? Climate Forest Coalition, they were number one in my book here, just bringing everybody together, getting all the comments in together. You know, Sierra Club was good, others, but instead of everybody reinventing, you know, Old Growth Forest Network, we didn't do our own thing. We got on with Climate Forest Coalition. We got hundreds of thousands of comments, literally hundreds of thousands of comments. Our goal was 500,000 for that, and we got it. And guess what? Logging showed up in the threats. Now, they downplayed it like it wasn't very much, but it was in there. So we were happy. Things were kind of moving along. And then came the time for the rulemaking for the amendment. So they had to do an environmental impact statement. Remember all that, the draft environmental impact statement. And by this point, everyone else had caught up with what was going on. The lobbyists from the timber industry were out in force saying what a bad idea this was to protect mature and old growth. And all of the timber beasts in the Forest Service woke up, and, you know, they'd been used to fighting the preservationists all these years, and so they started dragging their feet. And I think the real death knell was when the Republican governors out west all wrote to the president saying, you can't do this, you know, this should be decided by the states and not the federal government, even though it was federal land, to have all these governors against it. So now when the environmental impact statement comes out, there's a gazillion loopholes in there, right? You know, first of all, we were talking about mature and old growth. Mature was left by the wayside. Didn't matter that all these scientists wrote in about it, so it was just old growth. And then it was all the loopholes like, shouldn't be cut, unless this, unless that, unless the other. It was kind of empty, you know, so but still there was hope, you know, and the election was coming up in November. And then what happened then was we realized that even if we got this thing passed, that it was immediately going to be, now here's my political notes here. If the amendment was passed this late in the administration, it would expose it to reversal under the Congressional Review Act. See, this is all this political stuff I didn't know anything about before. I learned through this. And the Congressional Review Act, if you don't know, maybe you do, is there's this look back period of the last 60 days of active administration that can be reversed by the new administration. So that's nothing, you know, that wouldn't be so horrible, the reversal. But if it gets reversed, then you are prohibited from being reissued, meaning the Forest Service could not issue a new rule to protect old growth forests like that, I think, ever. So on January 8th, 2025, just 12 days before Trump's inauguration, that old growth amendment got pulled, right? So that was like, but we understood why it had to happen. I mean, we were so close. It could have been so good, but then it was kind of like whiplash. It immediately got even worse than we could ever imagine. And don't worry, after this little dip downhill, we're going to try to go uphill tonight. But just 6 weeks into his term, Trump released 2 executive orders that sought to dramatically increase logging. And he directed the officials in his agencies to speed up the logging by undermining review processes and longstanding environmental policies like the NEPA Act and the Endangered Species Act. Both of those were released on March 1st, less than 3 months ago. The first one was called Addressing the Threat of National Security from Imports of Timber and Lumber. Really? Our national security is at stake if we import some timber from Canada? That's a stretch to me. Okay. The other one was immediate expansion of American timber production. That says it all. You know, the loopholes in Biden's amendment felt like nothing now. It's like we would have happily accepted them after all this stuff. All the checks and balances we thought we had in place to protect us from kind of rogue executive order like this, we're watching them disappear one by one. It's pretty horrifying. Everything threatened to the core, including our public lands. Oh my God, you know, when there's talk of selling our public lands. And it felt like, to me, like a book by Derek Jensen titled Strangely Like War. That's kind of what it felt like. And remember in 2003, when we invaded Iraq, there was the shock and awe campaign. And it felt like it was the same kind of campaign, but directed at us. We were just in shock from going so high to thinking we're doing it to so low, worse than we could ever imagine. And to make it worse, this is the lowest point, and we'll go up. He's not acting alone, you know? His pick for Secretary of Interior, Doug Burgum, in charge of 500 million acres of public lands, including our national parks, was one of those Western governors who wrote in opposing that old growth act. He's now in favor of opening more of our public lands to drilling, so we not only have drill, baby, drill, we have cut, baby, cut. And then what about Secretary of Agriculture, which is where our national forests are, Brooke Rollins. I hear she's a climate denier with no experience in land management, yet she's in charge now of our 154 national forests, over 178 million acres. Last month, she issued a secretarial memo designating 59% of National Forest System lands as being in a state of emergency, meaning we have to hurry up and harvest them. By streamlining permitting under the processes and reducing the environmental review requirements under the NEPA Act. And with this bill that just passed 2 days ago, this is part of that. So now in the NEPA, there's that provision in there that they're calling pay to play, which is if you pay enough money ahead of time for a project that you're going to do, you can be guaranteed that there's going to be no judicial review of it. Oh my God, you know? You know, and I'm a scientist, I'm a biologist, I'm a writer. You know, this politics isn't something that is my specialty, but we have to be aware of this. So this is the reality, this is the low point, so what do we do about it? Running out, trying to come up. So to quote Jonathan Carter, a Maine environmental advocate, we need to build a mountain of resistance to the upcoming war against our forests. The work ahead of us to save some beauty and biodiversity for the next generations, to save the precious skin of this earth, is going to be so challenging that it almost makes me want to sit down, do nothing, ruff my feathers. This old goose. And that brings me to the title of my talk, Against the Wind, Forest Saving Lessons from the Geese. Because you know, if you watch those geese fly across the sky in their V formation, if you watch them long enough, that goose in the front is going to eventually drop back and take another place in line and there'll be another goose that takes the point lead. So how long does a goose stay in that point position until they fall back? There's really no exact timing. It depends on the wind conditions, and it depends on the individual stamina of the goose, right? So we all know people who have been working on these forest issues for a long, long time, but we can't be expected to do that forever. We all need to take our turns, because that lead goose is breaking the wind, but and making it easier for the geese behind them. But some people's individual stamina might be decades. Some people's individual stamina might be 6 months. But we should all just do what we can. Don't feel bad if you can only put your all into it for 2 years. Don't feel bad if you put your all into it for 40 years and stop. Thank you. But we need more of us. Okay. Yeah. Everyone in this room, who knows how long our stamina will hold out. So some of the past geese that were really amazing were like John Muir, right? 1903. What an amazing point goose, all that writing. He got President Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican, to create national parks and wilderness areas. I'm thinking of the point geese like Judy Berry and Darrell Cheney, who organized Redwood Summer in California in 1990. And I'm also thinking of Julia Butterfly Hill, who stayed 2 years up in Luna. But we need new geese willing to take the difficult leadership roles for a while. So speaking of Julia Butterfly Hill, so she was amazing what she did up in that tree for 2 years. And even after she came down, she spent a few years going around on a lecture circuit, talking to people, inspiring people. But then she kind of dropped out of that. So she hasn't done any forest advocacy work for decades. But still, what she did was really important. And I wrote that like 2 weeks ago. And then last week, Julia had her second public appearance since the pandemic, and it was for the forests. So did you hear about the play Redwood on Broadway? Yeah. It was an amazing play. I got to see it. It was all about big redwood tree and how climbing the redwoods can heal you. And it closed last week. And for closing night, Idina Menzel, the star, had invited Julia Butterfly to come to the performance and talk to the audience. And so she did. And I got to watch a little bit of that clip online since Julia posted on Facebook. And to just watch her speak for this forest again, it really warmed my heart, because she knows what's going on right now too. And I think she might also be, maybe encouraged to come take her turn again as a point goose. Okay. So I'm going to share my story now in case it might be useful for anyone. The first Heartwoods event I attended was 25 or 30 years ago. I don't know, we were trying to piece it together. So there I was a botanist, I was an ecologist, I was teaching college. I was a nobody in the world of forest preservation. I wanted to save trees, but I had no idea how. And I think there's a lot of people like that out there. They love the forest. They want to do something, they just don't know how. So somehow, this was even before the internet, I saw this advertisement for a flyer for Eastern Forest Defense Action Camp. And I said, that sounds good. I'm going to go to that. So I said, I left my husband and my daughter behind, and I got in my little truck, and I drove from Maryland to Indiana, didn't know a soul there, and I'm sure, I think they thought I was like some FBI plant or something because I didn't know anybody and I looked pretty straight and I wasn't even a forest preservation activist at that point. But just being in that group, learning things like, I never knew that police could lie to you, right? So that changed my life. I thought they were, I always had to tell you the truth, but nope, they can lie to you, you can lie to them. So also, we learned tree climbing techniques, and we didn't have even any of that fancy equipment. All we had were prusik knots. We had harnesses, but just ropes with prusik knots, and we learned to climb the trees. And then the wonderful volunteers teaching the tree climbing, there's a platform up in the tree, and they said, if anybody wants to, you can spend the night up here. And so that evening, I climbed back up with my sleeping bag and my water bottle, and I thought, I'm never going to fall asleep. I had my harness on, I was clipped into the tree, but I just fell right into this amazing sleep. Has anybody in here ever slept up in a tree? No, well, it's incredible because the trees have this little movement, that whole Rockabye Baby song, and I just slept so well. And when I woke up at dawn, the flying squirrels were running along in the branches. It was so good that I ended up writing about that experience in my first book, Teaching the Trees. So if you want to know more, you can look at that. So when I got back to the university, I taught my students about Julia Butterfly Hill. I showed them videos of young people getting the pepper spray put in their eyes during Redwood Summer. I helped them raise the money to bring Julia to campus, and she gave the best public talk I've ever heard. She's an amazing public speaker. Her dad was a Baptist minister, and so you could tell. By the end of this talk, we're standing up, holding our hands up, saying, we can save the forest, we can save the forest. And I think that had inspiration on me, like you talked about Dave Foreman this morning. Just our voices, just talking to people can make ripples that we don't even realize in their actions. So from there, my activism grew slowly and steadily. I had a dream that I would be one of the ones on the front lines someday, and it would be so cool because we would all be together speaking for the forest. So I started attending planning meetings for my state forest because Maryland has no national forest. So not very many people are attending the state forest planning meetings, and I showed up so many times that eventually I became on the Citizens Advisory Committee for our state forest, and eventually I started being able to make a little difference. But I also got an education in how things worked. I realized that it was mostly men, sorry guys, but it was in Maryland, and they were mostly interested in income from timber fiber, and if you can make some money on hunting leases on the side, that would be pretty good. But biodiversity, they cared nothing about. Beauty, they cared nothing about. So there I am on this committee. I'm realizing these things are important. How can I get that across to them? They're not going to really listen to me if I corner them and give them a lecture about this. So I thought I'll write to them, because if I put it in writing, then maybe they can read it on their own time and digest it in their own way. So I started writing essays about the biodiversity in the forest and the beauty in the forest and what we lose when we cut the forests, and how for each tree species, so many different organisms depend on that tree species, from bacteria to fungi to insects to the birds. And I wrote essay and another essay and another essay. And at one point I was like, oh, I think I'm writing a book. And it was just sort of a magical chain of events that book ended up getting published very quickly. And that was, again, that first book, Teaching the Trees. I don't know if they ever read that book or not. But the first chapter in it is called Old Growth Air, because I sought out an old growth forest, went to it. What did I experience? The air quality in that forest. It's like, wow. So I went back to the university. It's like, what is it about this air and these forests? And that's where I learned about the Japanese research on the wood air bathing and the health benefits, the Shinrin-yoku, and wrote about that in that chapter, Old Growth Air. And that chapter was reprinted in, I forget the name of the science magazine. It was like a science, like New Age science magazine, something like that. And it sort of sparked something, and all of a sudden there was all this talk about forest bathing and Shinrin-yoku and how healthy the forests are. And that, when I look back, that really started it, So I wrote that chapter and backed out. I wasn't really involved in the forest bathing movement, but to this day, it is a growing and important movement, and we're learning more and more about the health benefits to the forest. But the question I kept getting over and over from the people that read that was, where is that old growth forest you went to? How can I get to that forest? I want to go to that forest, because they wanted this experience. They read this and it's like, we know it, we have it, right? It's in our cells. We know this air is good for us and we want to get there. And these are the same questions I was asking, like, since I was a teenager. How many of our original forests are left? Where are they? How can I visit them? So I started researching and visiting the old growth forests in the East, which people weren't really talking about. They're only talking about the ones out West. And I decided I needed to write a second book that would tell people exactly how to get to these old growth forests in the East and what it was like there and why they're important. So that was the book, Among the Ancients, Adventures in the Eastern Old Growth Forest. And those trips sensitized me, all that time being in those forests and experiencing them. Suddenly, I love them. You spend enough time with an animal or a person or anything, and you develop a bond relationship. So then I wanted to save these forests, right? It's not enough to go in and just have a good time in there and say it's amazing, but I want to pay back. I want to protect you. I want to save you. And so that's what led me to create the Old Growth Forest Network organization, to save any of the old growth forests that were left, because there was no organization that was specifically looking to do that across the country. There's a lot of smaller, wonderful organizations speaking for the old growth in their area, but not every area has a group like that. There's big blanks out there where those forests aren't being spoken for. So the Old Growth Forest Network, protect the last of the old growth. Okay, that's great. How do you do that? And, oh yeah, we need more than 1% in the East and 5% in the West. We need to have some future old growth forests that won't be cut again. But how do you know if you're successful? So the scientist in me said, well, how about if we can make sure there's at least one in each county of the US that will never be cut again and is open to the public, so the next generation can experience these forests always. Even more, they'll have more to experience than we do. So that's the Old Growth Forest Network. And that organization really resonated with people. And they started donating to it, which is why I formed an organization, because I knew I couldn't quit my job, which is what I did, and start running this organization unless I had some financial support. And now we have a staff of, so this was 12 years ago I founded it. Now we have a staff of 4 full-time people, 7 part-time people. We have generous donations from private individuals and from family foundations. That's growing a lot too. We have 300 forests in the network in 39 different states, and we are growing strong. And now I've authored 5, soon to be 6 books. So I haven't stopped with that either. I find that that's a great way to communicate people. But in spite of all that, which sounds like, oh, great success, you know, and she's bragging, I can tell you that some days, instead of feeling like I was just one of those many forest advocates, like I envisioned, like we're all out there speaking together, some days it feels really, really lonely. And I'm sure you've all experienced this too. Maybe it's my less than ideal leadership style, but there are many days when I feel like if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it. Yeah. And have you ever heard that one goose flying across the sky by itself? You know, it's not in a V, it's going. Anybody want to imitate it for me? Anybody did goose? Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. That's how it feels some days. It's like whenever it is my fault. And they've also shown that not only does the point goose break the air for the rest of them, but the rest of them create a low pressure easier for the point goose too. So we need our flocks. The start of this year, I was so depressed with this national news. It kind of felt so overwhelmingly difficult at times. You know, just it's like, what's the point? What can you do? So I could feel that coming on. And I've never been one to suffer depression. I'm sorry for those that have. I know it's real, but I just could feel that oppression coming on. And I was like, I got to do my bare minimum. What's my bare minimum I could do? Can I save one tree? One tree. And there was this tree that was going to be cut down for a parking lot for a motel in my town. And I was like, we're going to save that tree. So I put prayer flags on the tree. I started talking to people about the tree. I talked to the surveyors that were out there. I spoke in favor of changing the planning so that they could get an amendment and have a smaller parking lot. I think it's going to work. And being here helps too. So anyway, saving the tree. This is another lesson from the goose. When headwinds are strong, they fly lower to where the wind resistance is weaker, or they change course to a path with less resistance. And we've had to do that this year with the Old Growth Forest Network too. So, you know, we're at 39 states. I really wanted Montana. We don't have a forest in Montana yet. And I've given a couple talks in the last couple of years in Montana, and I've been asking people about their forests out there. And the consensus was Ross Creek Cedars, scenic area. Has anybody been there? Kootenai National Forest. It's way up north. And I've seen photos of it. It is beautiful. So I'm like, oh, yes, perfect. This is going to be the perfect. When we have the first forest in a state, we get very excited. We make a big deal out of it. So I contacted and usually now it's other staff people that do this. At first it was just me doing this contacting. Now, mostly they do it. But for this one, I wanted to do it. So I had you kind of work your way into the Forest Service. You know, first you talk to the person that answers the phone, then you find out who's you know, they have all those job titles. And then you get to the PR person. Now that's usually the person on your side because they're like, oh, this is going to be fun. And then they get you to the supervisor. So the supervisor listened to me. It was great. And he was like, not sure. And what other national forests are you in? And can I talk to other people? And so this is why it's great to have a staff. I just go right to my staff. What other national forests are we in? What numbers? Here are their names. And I could, you know, by the end of the day, this document that I could share with him. And it took, you know, like maybe 2 months, back and forth a little bit. And finally he said, yes, this is great. We want to do it. We've talked to other people. It sounds excellent. And he told all his staff to work with me. And now it came down to just setting up the date for when the induction celebration was going to be. And we usually have a hike through the forest, and, it's just so fun. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll get invited to the ones for your state. So this was Friday. I wrote and said, well, I'm going to be out west for this anyway. And this date would be perfect for me. It was going to be August 25th. I was figuring out where I was going to stay. And then on Monday, we get the email. It's just mayhem because of the new federal government, all the firings. Nobody knows what to do. These poor federal employees. The last thing they have to deal with is banning forest deal with Earth Forest Network. So instead of pushing against that, the geese, we're changing course, we're going lower. They're like, all right, we're just going to deal with state forests, county forests, organization-owned forests, and we'll wait for the air to clear with the federal forests. Now, we can do that because we work on all kinds of different ownership, but I know if your organization is dealing just with the national forests, what can you do? So one thing is possible, perhaps, anybody familiar with Joanna Macy?
Yes.
Yeah, and Joanna Macy would talk about holding actions. Like, even if you can't push things forward, you can at least try to keep them as they are. And we have to remember that although our NEPA and ESA regulations are threatened, they still exist. And the judges are our last line of defense there. This has come up other times this weekend. So the judges can be useful in those holding actions. So just like I learned more about politics than I ever wanted to know, we're also going to have to learn more about law than we ever wanted to know. And we're going to have to get good attorneys on our side. I was happy to hear that somebody made it possible for Heartwoods to have an attorney. We just got a good attorney on our board, kind of building those relationships, and funders too. Funders, because these attorneys deserve to make a living also. So we got to get philanthropists that'll help us pay for attorneys and get these issues in front of judges, because I think that's what it's going to take right now. So the other thing the geese do when strong winds are against them is to tighten formation. Their usual V formation becomes more compact, so it's more aerodynamic. And Heartwood is really important in this for bringing together all these groups to tighten the formation. Also, right now, Climate Forest Campaign, the same group that organized the comments to the amendments, they are calling for the formation of a national forest defense network to work together to build that mountain of resistance. So I hope all your organizations have signed up to become part of this National Forest Defense Network through the Climate Forest Campaign. And I like to suggest that maybe we even think about going one step further eventually, and that is having a nationwide forest preservation alliance. And I'm inspired in this through what's happening in the United Kingdom. There they have Woodland Trust, and Woodland Trust does it all. So if you're gonna, if there's a bad national bill that you wanna speak against, Woodland Trust is gonna help you. If there's an important forest, old forest that you wanna save, Woodland Trust is gonna help you. If there's trees that you wanna plant in an urban area, Woodland Trust is gonna help you. So they do all the pieces. And because they're so important, it's a point of pride for people to donate to them. And they have 300,000 members, and their budget is $100 million. So maybe someday we will have, we'll still need the groups in local areas, but think of Land Trust Alliance and how much stronger these local land trusts got when they could get under the Land Trust Alliance umbrella. Now, it's not perfect. I know there's problems with that, but it really helped them to share information. And back to the geese. If conditions get too bad, the geese just land and rest. I get it. It's almost tempting to just sit out the next few years, isn't it? Just go to Sumatra or something. I don't know. But we can't afford that luxury because a lot of damage can be done in these next couple of years that will take centuries to recover from, if recovery is even possible with what's going on with the climate. So we need to build that mountain of resistance, but never forget where our strength comes from. It comes from the love that we feel for this alive planet. Right? Over my workspace, I keep a reminder from Edward Abbey from his afterword of Desert Solitaire. You might be familiar with this one that starts out, one final paragraph of advice. Does that sound familiar to anyone? A couple people. One final paragraph of advice. Do not burn yourselves out. Be as I am, a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. Save the other half of yourselves and your lives for pleasure and adventure. It is not enough to fight for the land. It is even more important to enjoy it while you can, while it's still here. And that's where our strength comes from. And it concludes, I promise you this one sweet victory over our enemies, over those desk-bound men and women with their hearts in a safe deposit box and their eyes hypnotized by desk calculators. I promise you this, you will outlive the bastards. And I think these days, Ed Abbey would have written, with their hearts in a crypto vault and their eyes hypnotized by electronic spreadsheets. But we know what he meant. And when he says outlive, I don't think he means lifespan years. He means live, right? Living life, the depth of a life. We who develop, maintain, and perhaps I should say are gifted a deep, loving relationship with the miraculous planet that sustains us, we are outliving those who see nature only as a resource to be measured in dollars. We might feel sorry for them were it not for the tremendous damage they are doing. So this old goose will keep plugging along. I hope you will too. We've done our part though. We need new goose to take the lead. So if you came this weekend wondering how you can get more involved in saving forests the way I did 3 decades ago, this is your call. I'm honking at you. Take over the lead, please. Be more powerful, more effective than I've ever been. And let's fly off into the sunset and save the forest together. So I have a table in the other room, and our website's on there. It's oldgrowthforest.net, and we have on our website, you can find all the forests, and you can go there. They're all open to the public, and anyone can nominate a forest anywhere. So if you look and see your favorite old forest is not on there, you can nominate it. We have volunteers. We try to get volunteers in each county to look at all the nominated forests or to research forests, and they'll make their final suggestion to us. And then we reach out to whoever owns that forest and make sure it's protected from logging. Sometimes it is already, like if it's a wilderness area, or if there's been a no-log easement put on it, let's say with a land trust, and then we can go ahead with things. Other times, people assume that the forests are protected, like the Pennsylvania parks we were talking about today that actually aren't. And so then we look at that paperwork, and if we can help them get stronger protections on it, we do. And so that's a really important part of our work that's really like a finessing. You know, we're always looking for ways that we can get in and try to get more protections on a piece of property. Okay, so thank you very much again, and have a good day.
Right now,
What?
the chimney splits are gathering up to go down the chimney. If anyone's never seen that before,
This is the night we're talking about.
This is cool. This is worth seeing. So, motion.
So these are chimney swifts. And they roost in old growth hollow trees or chimneys that haven't been capped. And all of a sudden they'll start dropping into that chimney over there.